The Maid of Midnight, written by Short Story Queen. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Sleeps Through Sunlight. Most people in town didn't even know her real name. They called her Sarah, because that's what the faded employee tag said, pinned crookedly on her black sweater. No last name, no past. Just a whisper of a girl who only emerged after sundown and vanished before the sun could warm the streets. Some said she had a skin condition. Others thought she was just one of those night people, the quiet kind who drink black coffee like it's religion and never quite meet your eyes. She liked it that way. The bookstore was ancient and crumbling, with shelves that bowed under the weight of too many forgotten stories. Dust hung in the air, like a memory no one wanted to name. The fluorescent lights above buzzed with a failing pulse. It never mattered. Customers rarely came after dark, except the lonely ones, the ones with nowhere else to be. Seraphine Vale, because that was her real name once, kept her head down, her voice soft, her sleeves long. She moved through the hours like smoke through cracks in old stone. This town was small and easy to disappear in. That was why she had come. Until he arrived. She first saw him on a Tuesday, 10 minutes before closing. The bell above the door gave its tired jangle, but she felt him before she saw him. A pressure in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. She looked up from the counter, and her breath caught on something unspoken. He was tall, dressed in black like it was armor, the kind of black that didn't catch light. His coat brushed his knees, tailored and silent. Hands bare, clean, unmoving. His skin was pale but not sickly, sharp, carved, untouched by the sun, and his eyes. They were obsidian fractured with veins of gold, so dark they looked bottomless. He didn't say a word. He didn't browse. He didn't blink. He just stood there, watching. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Not because he was beautiful, though he was in that severe, inhuman way. It was something deeper, older. Her bones reacted before her mind could name it. She felt seen. Not the version of herself she presented here. The other one. The part that still dreamed in a language she didn't remember learning. The part that sometimes woke up at night, tasting ash and blood and longing. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm only because she had spent years practicing how to sound harmless. He said nothing. The silence stretched. Not empty, not awkward. It was dense, thick with something she didn't understand. She could feel the weight of his gaze brushing her skin, tracing the line of her jaw, the slope of her neck. Not with lust, not yet, with recognition. He turned then, just a small pivot of his body, and left. No purchase, no name, no explanation. But the air didn't settle after he was gone. It lingered, electric and wrong, like something had been opened that couldn't be shut. She told herself not to think of him, but she couldn't help noticing the scent he left behind, like winter air, passing through the ruins of a chapel. Cold, clean, grieving. The next night, he returned. No sound of footsteps, no shift of wind. Just the soft ring of the doorbell, and then he was there, standing in the same place, at the same time, like a ghost that had memorized its cue. She watched him more closely this time, trying not to show it. He never looked at the books, never moved, just stood, watching. This time she didn't speak. She simply let the silence hold. And still, he left without a word. The third night, she dreamed. A temple, vast and open to the night. Pillars rose from black marble like teeth. She stood at the center, barefoot, her arms bare, something gold winding around her wrists. And he was there too, cloaked in shadow, stepping toward her with reverence that didn't hide the hunger beneath. His hand reached for her throat, not to hurt, not to choke, but to touch, to remember. Her skin responded like it already knew him, like it had never forgotten. She woke, gasping, throat dry, sheets tangled, her pulse a wild thing behind her ribs. The fourth night, he didn't come, and it left her raw in ways she couldn't explain. She told herself she was grateful, that it was better not to be seen. But every hour that passed without him made her restless, unsettled, like a thread had been pulled inside her and left hanging. When he returned on the fifth night, something in her chest loosened. This time, he stepped closer. Not all the way to the counter, but enough that she could see the fine detailing of his coat. The way his collarbone moved when he breathed, if he breathed at all. She pretended to be absorbed in the worn ledger, wrote a date that didn't matter. The air between them hummed with something unspoken. Then he spoke. Just 2 words. "You've changed." Her pen paused. Her stomach turned over. She looked up, slowly, careful not to let the fear show. "Excuse me?" His eyes held hers like chains. "You don't remember, yet." There was something cold and final in his voice, but not cruel. As though he mourned what had been lost. As though he had spent years memorizing a version of her that no longer existed. She said nothing. She didn't trust her voice not to betray her. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat, pulled something out, and placed it on the counter. A ring. Antique. Iron. Its surface was etched with symbols, too old for any living language. And yet she recognized it. Her fingers itched. He didn't wait for questions. Didn't ask permission. He simply turned and walked out into the night again, the bell above the door sounding like a warning. She stared at the ring long after he was gone, the metal still faintly warm from his touch. That night, she didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, but because her skin remembered the weight of his gaze, and her body answered to a hunger that had nothing to do with blood. It was longing, old, sharp, dangerous, and it was only just beginning. Chapter 2. The Stranger Who Doesn't Blink. The bookstore window had begun to fog from the damp sea air drifting in through the cracked glass. Seraphine sat behind the counter with her knees drawn close, the dim yellow lamplight pooling across her hands. The ring lay before her like a heartbeat caught mid-pulse. She hadn't touched it again since the night he'd left it there, yet she couldn't stop looking at it. It seemed to hum faintly, as though it remembered her, even if she didn't remember herself. She told herself she wouldn't wait for him, but she caught her reflection in the window. Her eyes not the soft violet gray she'd grown used to, but deeper, shadowed, almost luminous. It frightened her, that trace of otherness surfacing again. Outside, The street was empty. The lamp-posts bowed under the mist. It was nearly 2 a.m. when the bell above the door stirred the silence. She didn't look up at once. She already knew. The presence filled the space before he did, pressing against her skin like a storm waiting to break. The air thickened, the faint scent of rain and iron curling through the room. When she finally raised her head, he was there, closer than before, unhurried, still as a painting. Kael Draven. She didn't know his name yet, but the shape of him felt familiar, like a story she'd heard in another lifetime. He didn't speak. He simply stood, eyes fixed on her. That same unbearable stillness. He might as well have been carved from the shadows themselves. "I don't know what you want," she said quietly, her voice a thin thread between them. His gaze traveled from her face to the ring, then back again. "You will." She wished he hadn't spoken. His voice wasn't loud. It was low, deliberate, threaded with something that seemed to reach beneath her ribs and twist. Each word carried the faint echo of command and something else. Regret, maybe. Or longing. She stood, though her legs trembled slightly. If this is some kind of game, I'm not playing. He didn't answer. His eyes traced the movement of her breath, the flutter of her pulse at her throat, as if he were memorizing them. The silence thickened until it felt physical. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. The air between them vibrated faintly, the way it does before a lightning strike. He took a step closer. Just one. And the world seemed to tilt. Her skin prickled, her body aware of his nearness in ways that logic couldn't explain. He smelled faintly of cedar smoke and night air, clean, old, unchanging. He moved with a quiet precision, not human. Every motion measured, graceful, as if time itself slowed to make room for him. She backed away until her hip touched the counter. He stopped then, leaving barely a breath between them. His hand lifted, slowly, as though testing the air, and for an instant she thought he might touch her face. But he didn't. His fingers hovered inches from her skin, trembling faintly. She realized with a start that it wasn't fear in him, it was restraint. She could feel the warmth of him, despite the cold. His presence seeped into her like ink into water, staining every thought. "What are you?" she whispered. His eyes softened, just slightly. The wrong question. Then he was gone. She hadn't even seen him move, just a blur of shadow that dissolved through the door, leaving the bell to whisper its brittle farewell. Seraphine stood motionless. The silence felt alive, as if it had been waiting for this moment to breathe again. Her fingers brushed her throat, tracing the place where his gaze had lingered. The skin there was warm, almost fevered. She spent the next hours pacing the narrow aisles of the shop, pretending to straighten books she'd already ordered twice. Every creak of the floorboards made her tense. Every flicker of the street light outside teased her heart into racing again. When dawn began to pale the edges of the window, she closed her eyes and saw him still. Those eyes, the faint gold fracture within the darkness, the way he looked at her not like a stranger, but a man who'd already lost her once. Sleep refused to come. Instead, images surfaced behind her eyelids, firelight spilling across stone, her own bare feet stepping over petals, a voice whispering a name that was not hers. Nissa. The sound of it clung to her dreams, like a secret trying to wake. Days blurred together. He didn't come again, but she felt him everywhere. The corners of the room hummed with his absence. When customers entered, she found herself glancing past them, searching for the wrong silhouette. She hated herself for it. Hated that her body seemed to remember the warmth of a nearness she couldn't explain. Then, one night, it rained. The streets shone slick beneath the street lamps, reflections breaking like glass. She locked up early and leaned against the counter, watching the water streak down the windows. The storm muffled everything, the world outside a soft, endless hiss. Her eyes drifted to the ring again. The iron seemed darker now, its markings alive with faint red light, pulsing once and fading. Her chest tightened. She reached for it before she could think, her fingertips brushing the cool metal. And the world tilted. A flash, too quick to see, too bright to understand. A vision, or memory, or both. A hand, his hand, pressing that ring onto her finger while fire burned behind him. The scent of smoke. The whisper of a promise. Even death won't unmake us. The light vanished, and she was back in the empty shop, trembling. The doorbell chimed. He was there again, soaked from the rain, water sliding down his collar and vanishing before it reached the floor. His eyes were darker tonight, his expression unreadable. Neither spoke. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. She should have moved, but her body betrayed her. Her pulse thudded low in her throat. When he reached her, he stopped close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the pale seam that broke the perfection of his face. She didn't realize she'd lifted her hand until her fingers hovered near it, inches away. His breath, or whatever echoed of it, brushed her skin. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured, but the words lacked conviction. "I waited long enough," he said, voice low as thunder rolling far away. Something in his tone drew her in. The ache beneath the control. The centuries buried in those few syllables. She looked into his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't hide what lived there. Longing, rage, grief, devotion so fierce it frightened her. Her breath caught. He reached for her wrist, fingers brushing her skin just long enough for heat to spark beneath her pulse. Not a threat. Not yet. A connection. Ancient, remembered, inescapable. "Don't," she whispered, but the word trembled between them like an invitation. He leaned closer until the space between their breaths disappeared. The scent of rain clung to him. His lips didn't touch hers, but the nearness was unbearable. Then, as if the moment had been too fragile to survive, he drew back. "You'll remember soon," he said, softer this time. And then he was gone again. Only the echo of his presence left, hanging in the still air, heavy with something that refused to fade. Seraphine stood alone, her skin still tingling where his hand had brushed hers, the storm outside breaking like a heartbeat against the glass. She pressed her palm to the counter, trying to steady herself. But it was too late. Whatever he had awakened inside her wasn't going back to sleep. Chapter 3. Blood Memory. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 nights. It drummed against the windows in slow, steady rhythm, filling the bookstore with the sound of distant waves. Seraphine sat alone beneath the yellow light, the ring still on the counter, its dull iron surface gleaming faintly in the lamplight. She hadn't put it on, yet every night she found herself touching it, tracing the ancient markings with her fingertip, feeling their strange heat pulse faintly beneath her skin. She didn't see him again, but she felt him, always at the edge of her senses. Sometimes in the shift of the air when she locked the door, sometimes in the faint brush of cold that followed her to her small apartment above the shop. She had stopped pretending not to expect him. Her dreams had begun to betray her. They came sharper now, no longer shadows and whispers, but entire moments that felt too real to be imagined. She stood in a courtyard lit by torches, wearing a crown that shimmered like spilled light. He stood before her, younger but unchanged, his hand cupping her face as if he'd crafted it. Their foreheads touched, the world burning around them. The echo of that touch followed her into waking, into every slow breath she took. When she woke that morning, her throat tasted of iron and smoke. She found bruises on her wrists where his hands had held her in the dream. Not pain, just marks, soft and blue, like evidence of something half remembered. By the next night, the storm had turned savage. The power flickered out across the street, leaving the shop lit only by candles she'd found in an old drawer. She was closing early when she heard it. A low crash from the alley outside. Her pulse jumped. For a moment she told herself it was the wind, but then she smelled it. The metallic tang of blood. Not human. Not entirely. It stirred something buried deep in her, something that made her teeth ache. Before she could think, she stepped out into the rain. The alley was a blur of wet asphalt and shadows. The smell grew stronger. She followed it, each step an argument against instinct. At the far end of the alley, she saw him, Kael, half shrouded by the rain, his back to her, a dark shape crouched over another figure that lay twisted and still. The fallen body's eyes were pale, already dimming. A vampire. She knew it by the smell. Kael's shoulders rose and fell once before he spoke, voice low. He was sent to find you. Seraphine froze. Me? He turned then, and the sight of his face unmoored her. Blood streaked his jaw, rain cutting red lines down his neck. It should have looked monstrous. It didn't. It looked like truth. His eyes found hers through the storm, and for a moment she forgot to be afraid. He stood, slow, deliberate, the dying man's body collapsing soundlessly behind him. You shouldn't be outside, he said, stepping closer. You shouldn't be killing people in alleys. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. He wasn't people. Lightning broke above them, white and violent. It threw his features into harsh relief, the wet hair slicked back, the faint gleam of fangs when he breathed out. He looked otherworldly, drenched and unbent, like a creature carved out of the night itself. She took a step back, but the wall was already behind her. The cold stone pressed against her spine. He followed, not menacingly, but with a patience that was somehow worse. "Why are they looking for me?" she whispered. He stopped close enough that she could feel the heat of him through the wet air. "Because you are not supposed to exist." She wanted to demand answers, but the words scattered when he reached up and brushed a strand of soaked hair from her face. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. His hand lingered a fraction too long, fingers tracing the edge of her jaw, the corner of her mouth. The world stilled. The rain fell softer. Even the thunder seemed to hush for a heartbeat. Something inside her shifted. Not fear. Something older, deeper. Recognition. She should have turned away, should have told him to stop, but her body betrayed her, leaning into his touch as if drawn by memory. His hand slid to the back of her neck, his thumb against the hollow of her throat, feeling the flutter of her pulse. She could sense the restraint in him, the war between hunger and reverence. "Don't," she breathed, though she wasn't sure which of them she was warning. His voice was quiet. "I waited centuries for that heartbeat." And before she could answer, the night blurred. The world spun. He moved faster than thought, pulling her against him as another shape lunged from the darkness. A second figure, eyes burning crimson, blade in hand. She didn't see the motion, only felt the gust of air as Kael turned, the flash of metal, the wet sound of impact. It was over before she could blink. The attacker fell in a heap, lifeless, rain washing the blood away before it could reach their feet. Kael's arm still wrapped around her, firm and steady, his body a wall of heat against the storm. She hadn't realized she was shaking until his hand tightened on her shoulder. "Look at me," he said, soft but absolute. She lifted her eyes. Rain dripped from his lashes. Beneath the steel of his expression, something cracked, something raw and human. "I will protect you," he said, "even if you don't want me to." She should have fought him, should have pushed him away, but the warmth of his hand still burned through her soaked clothes, and for the first time in years, she felt something stronger than fear. Her gaze fell to the ring still in her pocket, now glowing faintly against the fabric, pulsing in rhythm with her own heart. Kael's eyes followed hers. "It remembers you," he murmured. "Even if you don't." She didn't answer. Her mind was spinning too fast, her blood humming too loud. When he finally released her, the absence of his touch felt unbearable, like a flame snuffed too soon. He stepped back into the rain, his expression unreadable. "Go inside. Lock the door. They won't stop now that they've found your scent." "And you?" He paused. "I don't need doors." Then he was gone again, vanishing into the curtain of rain. Seraphine stood alone in the alley, the world spinning quietly around her. She pressed a trembling hand against her chest and felt the faint pulse beneath her ribs. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition. Something ancient had awakened, and it was moving through her veins like fire seeking its source. When she finally went inside, the ring was warm in her palm. She didn't remember slipping it on, but when she looked down, it was there, perfectly fitted, gleaming faintly in the candlelight. And somewhere far beyond the storm, she felt him smile. Chapter 4. The General's Claim. She didn't take the ring off, not because she meant to keep it, Not because she accepted whatever meaning it carried, but because each time she tried, her hand froze, fingers refusing to move as if the thing had taken root. The metal felt weightless on her skin, neither cold nor warm, and yet it pulsed faintly when she thought of him. That night, she didn't dream. She remembered. Not in fragments or flashes this time, but in full, like falling into a story that had been waiting just beneath the surface. She stood on black stone, wrapped in moonlight. The air around her smelled of crushed roses and old magic. He was there, kneeling before her, not as he was now, but almost, his face the same, but younger, untouched by centuries. He bowed his head, not in submission but reverence, and lifted her hand to his lips. She felt the weight of a crown on her head and the power in her blood surging, ancient and terrible. They had bound each other then, not with vows, not with rings, but with blood and breath and something deeper. She saw herself die. She saw him hold her body. And she saw the moment he swore he would find her again, no matter what form she wore. She woke before dawn, the sheets tangled, skin damp with a heat that hadn't come from the weather. Her lips ached, her fingers trembled. She couldn't breathe without tasting him, without hearing the sound of his voice pressed against her throat. When the sun finally rose, she closed the blinds and retreated to the back of the shop, curling into a chair with the old velvet drape pulled over her like a shield. The ring glinted through the fabric. Her pulse hadn't settled since the dream. Or memory. She didn't know which frightened her more. Mara knocked on the door late that afternoon, letting herself in with a cheery, "Sarah? You alive in there, or did a dusty bookshelf finally collapse on you?" Seraphine managed a weak smile, nodding toward the register. "Can you cover tonight?" "I'm not feeling great." Mara raised an eyebrow. "You, Miss Never Takes a Day Off? What is it? Vampire flu?" The joke didn't land. Seraphine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Something like that." She didn't wait for more questions. She slipped out through the alley, hoodie pulled up, ring turned inward against her palm. She walked aimlessly, not trusting herself to think. Her body ached, not with illness, but with absence. She could feel him, always hovering near. The connection tugged at her like a tide, pulling her towards something she wasn't ready to name. She ended up at the edge of town, near the cliff path no one used after dark. The sea churned far below, wind pulling at her clothes. He was already there, standing with his back to her, coat billowing in the wind, the ocean throwing silver light across his shoulders. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. "I didn't call you," she said, though her voice betrayed her. "I know." He turned slowly, eyes catching the fading light, gold threads alive within the black. The wind didn't touch him. His stillness made the world feel louder. "You remember?" It wasn't a question. She hesitated. "Pieces. Enough." He stepped closer, not rushed, not hesitant, the way a man might approach something sacred. "You were a queen," he said, "a weapon, a gift. You ruled with your blood, and I was the blade that served you. We weren't lovers by accident." She laughed once, too sharp. "You talk like I owe you something." No. His voice was lower now. But you're mine. The words settled between them, neither soft nor cruel. Not possessive, not quite. Inevitable, like he was naming gravity. She took a step back. You think because I wore a crown once and shared a bed with you in another life that you can just show up now and claim me? He was in front of her before the last word left her lips, not touching her, but close. The kind of close that shattered thought. No, he said again. I'm not here to claim you. I'm here to make sure no one else does. The ache in her chest twisted. She hated how her body responded to him, the way her breath shortened, the way her skin leaned toward his, like it remembered the shape of his hands. He lifted a hand to her face, slow, giving her time to stop him. She didn't. His thumb traced her cheekbone, then lower, brushing the line of her jaw. His touch was gentle, reverent, like he feared she might vanish again. You are not a pawn, Seraphine, he murmured. Not to them, not to me. Then why are you here? She whispered. He leaned in, not to kiss her, not yet, but close enough that his breath stirred her hair. Because if they find you, they'll bind you to the throne again. They'll use you, drain you, turn you into something hollow and obedient. And you, I want you as you are. His voice dipped, the weight of centuries pressing through it. Wild, forgotten, afraid. I want you, even when you want to run from me. She hated the way her heart answered him. Hated how it wanted to reach for his voice, like a prayer. Her hands shook. He noticed. His gaze flicked to the ring on her finger, then back to her face. You feel it, don't you? He asked softly. That tether between us. The ache. She looked away. It's not real. It's some old magic. A curse. No. His breath brushed her skin. It's memory. Yours and mine. Every life you lived in between, I found pieces. Every time you died, I waited. A pause. The wind howled. I never touched another. The words burned in the air, not because they were romantic, but because they were true. Seraphine turned her face to his slowly, their mouths now a breath apart. The tension between them wasn't fragile. It was violent in its stillness. Her blood felt hot, heavy. She didn't kiss him, but she didn't move. Her lips parted slightly. His gaze flicked there, and his chest rose sharply. Then he backed away. A single step. Not like this, he said. Not when you're unsure. She wanted to scream. Wanted to drag him back. Wanted to see if his mouth still tasted like fire and prophecy. Instead, she turned and walked away, heart hammering against her ribs like a locked door. He didn't follow, but she knew without turning that he was still watching, waiting. And she hated how much she wanted to be caught. Chapter 5. Shadows in Velvet. The town felt different after that night. Not louder, not brighter, just more alert, as if something had shifted beneath the surface and every shadow was watching. Seraphine felt it in the air, in the way the streetlights flickered a second too long in the way people paused before walking past her on the sidewalk, like their instincts recoiled from something they couldn't name. She stopped looking for Kael in the alleyways. Now she felt him, always, as though a thread had been pulled taut between them, stretched through time and blood and whatever strange force still echoed in her bones. The space he once filled with silence now throbbed with a presence that haunted her, even when he wasn't near. Her hands weren't steady anymore. Not when she reached for the shop keys. Not when Mara made jokes that she didn't hear. Her mouth responded out of habit, her voice soft and flat, but her thoughts were elsewhere, looping again and again to that moment by the cliff, his breath on her skin, his voice in her blood. That wasn't something you walked away from. Not really. And yet she had. She told herself it was choice, that her refusal had power. But late at night, curled under the old quilt in the back room, she touched the ring on her finger and hated how easily her body warmed at the memory of his touch. The ache hadn't lessened. If anything, it had grown. And then the others came. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't break glass or demand answers. But she noticed them. The glint of eyes and mirrors where there should have been none. A figure standing too still across the street, vanishing when she blinked. Mara complained of a man following her home, described someone pale with a twisted smile and the smell of decay in his wake. Seraphine tried to stay calm, but her hands trembled beneath the counter, and the ring grew warm again, like it sensed the danger before she did. Kael didn't come for 2 nights. That silence filled her with a slow, strangling dread. Until the 3rd night, when he appeared not outside the store or by the cliffs, but inside the shop itself, standing between the bookshelves like a shadow folded in velvet. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch, because her body had already started to calm before her mind caught up. His presence didn't feel like danger, not exactly. It felt like recognition, like gravity. "You're letting them get too close," he said without preamble, voice low, roughened at the edges. "You disappeared." His eyes flicked to her. The dim lamplight caught the gold in them, making them glow faintly. "I watched. You just didn't see me." The idea of him out there, hidden in the dark, following her from rooftops or alleys like a secret guardian, should have frightened her. Instead, something sharp and hot twisted in her chest. "I don't need saving," she said, though it sounded weak, even to her. "You're not being hunted by mortals. These are ancient things," he said, stepping closer. "Sent by the court. They don't want to claim you. They want to use you, drain you, make you theirs." His words coiled in the air between them, thick with implication. She stayed still as he closed the distance between them. Every step he took narrowed the space, made it harder to breathe. When he reached her, he didn't touch her. Not at first. But she felt the heat of his body bleed into her skin. Like his nearness alone could set her alight. He looked at her like he already knew how she'd break. "You're wearing the ring." She nodded once. "Why?" Her voice faltered. "Because I remembered." His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered there. "And what did you remember?" Her fingers curled around the counter's edge, knuckles tight. "What it felt like," to be wanted. Not gently, not sweetly, like a need. The sound he made was barely audible, a breath caught halfway between restraint and something far more dangerous. When he moved, it wasn't to kiss her. It was worse. He reached out and dragged his fingertips down the line of her throat, so lightly it barely counted as a touch. But her knees weakened all the same. His hand settled at the hollow above her heart. "It wasn't need," he said, his voice so soft it trembled. "It was devotion, hunger, worship, all of it." Her breath came faster. "You say that like it's something noble." "No." His thumb moved, slow, tracing her collarbone. "I say it like it's something ruinous." The weight of him, his presence, his longing, the brutal tenderness in his voice, was too much. She felt her resistance fray, not snap, just threadbare and thinning. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she let the truth surface. Let him see the want she had buried beneath sarcasm and silence. "Why me?" she asked, and it wasn't just about this life. It was about all the others, about why, across centuries, she haunted him enough that he still came back. His jaw tensed. "Because you were made for me, and I was forged to guard you." It was absurd, arrogant, beautiful, and it undid her completely. Still, he didn't press his mouth to hers. He leaned closer, but he stopped a breath away. His lips hovered just beside her jaw, and she could feel the heat of him, the unspoken promise. His restraint was more seductive than any touch. She tilted her head, just slightly, baring her neck. It wasn't surrender. It was permission. His lips brushed her skin, not biting, not claiming. Just a kiss. Gentle, reverent, full of centuries. And still, it scorched. Her fingers found his coat, clutched the lapel without thinking. Every nerve in her body rose to meet him. Her breath hitched, her chest pressed to his, and for a moment, the room spun, anchored only by the weight of him. Then he pulled back, just far enough for her to open her eyes. He looked wrecked, controlled, barely. "If I stay, I won't stop," he said, voice cracking like thunder underwater. "Then don't stay," she whispered, though her body ached at the words. He nodded once, jaw clenched. And like that, he vanished again. The door never opened. The air just emptied, but the heat of him lingered. She stood frozen for a long while, her pulse still thudding like a drumbeat in a long-forgotten war. Outside, the shadows shifted, and every part of her knew the velvet silence wouldn't last. Something was coming, but so was he. Chapter 6. A temple beneath her skin. The town breathed quieter after nightfall, like it knew better than to challenge the dark. Seraphine wandered the empty streets beneath a sky heavy with stars. Her coat pulled tight around her, as the wind carried the faint scent of salt and cold stone. The ring on her finger pulsed faintly, almost in rhythm with her steps. It was no longer just a token of memory. It was a tether. And wherever it led, her body followed with a hunger she barely understood. She had told herself she wouldn't go looking for him, but her feet led her past the last row of flickering lamps, along the old stone path that hugged the cliffs. The sea below roared like it had secrets to keep. She had walked this path before, alone, silent, but tonight was different. She felt drawn, as though a thread had been wound inside her chest and pulled taut by a force waiting in the dark. The air changed first, sharper, older, laced with something that didn't belong to this century. Then she saw him, standing at the end of the path near the cliff's edge, where the earth dipped into shadow. Kael's silhouette was carved against the sea, his coat trailing like smoke, his posture still and waiting. "You feel it now," he said, without turning. His voice didn't startle her anymore. It had become part of the night. "I don't know what I feel." He turned slowly, and even in the faint light, she saw the flicker of approval, or relief in his eyes. Not satisfaction. Something quieter, sadder. "You're waking." Her steps faltered. Waking to what? He offered no answer. Instead, he reached toward a narrow passage hidden by the rocks. It wasn't a cave exactly, more like an opening carved by time and purpose. She hesitated at the entrance, but the air that spilled from the tunnel was warm, laced with the scent of dust, old stone, and something floral. Jasmine, perhaps, or something more ancient. He waited for her to follow. She did. The tunnel wound deep beneath the cliffs, each step drawing her closer to something that pulsed inside her bones. There were markings on the walls, symbols she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. Every glance stirred a memory. Every breath filled her lungs with a scent she hadn't inhaled in this life. When the tunnel finally opened into a chamber, the breath caught in her throat. A temple, or what was left of one. The domed ceiling had partially collapsed, letting moonlight spill through in fractured beams. Vines curled through the cracks. But the carvings on the stone floor, the remnants of altars, the golden mosaic of a woman with eyes like hers, none of it was broken. This place wasn't forgotten. It had simply been waiting. "You built this for me," she whispered. "No," Kael said softly behind her. "You built it. I only protected it." She turned. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned like something just barely restrained. "What was I?" He stepped closer. "You were the last of the moon-marked line, born under the eclipse. Your blood held two ancient houses, human and vampire. And because of that, the court feared you. They wanted you bound to them. Instead, you bound yourself to no one. But I bound myself to you." He didn't answer, but the way he looked at her said enough. She moved to the center of the room. The mosaic beneath her feet depicted a woman, herself, not just in appearance, but in posture and power. Her arms were raised, and behind her, two shadows knelt. One had wings, the other, fangs. "I was dangerous." "Yes." "Are you afraid of me now?" He stepped forward, close enough that their breath mingled. "No. I'm afraid of what they'll do when they realize you're alive again." Her throat tightened. "And what will you do?" Kael's hand lifted, brushing her hair back from her face. His fingers were colder than her skin, but the sensation made her flush. He cupped her cheek, and she let him. There was no use pretending anymore. Her body leaned into his, as if the memory of every other lifetime had carved itself into her bones. "I will fight for you," he said, "even if you choose not to remember me." The warmth that spread through her at his words wasn't soft or safe. It was searing, cruel, overwhelming. It made her ache. Her breath came quicker. He didn't kiss her. He pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture more intimate than anything else. Her hands came up, unsure of themselves, but they found his coat, clenched into the fabric like it might anchor her to the moment. "I don't know who I am yet," she whispered. "You don't need to." His voice was rougher now, ragged at the edges. "I've known you in every version of yourself. I'll know you again." He pulled back, just enough to look at her. Eyes searching, asking. Not for permission, but for truth. Her answer wasn't words. She stepped forward and placed his hand over her heart. His fingers spread, his palm flat against the place where her pulse beat fastest. The look in his eyes shifted. Hunger. Yes, but reverence too. Like she was a thing he had broken for, bled for, and would again. Their mouths met, not with desperation, but with the weight of centuries behind it. His lips were cold, but his kiss wasn't. It was heat drawn from ancient fire, from promises made in rooms just like this one. She melted into him. Every barrier gone. Her body remembered the shape of his hands, the way he kissed her, as though he could never get close enough. And when he drew away, breath shallow, his forehead against hers again, she knew something had shifted, permanently. She wasn't just remembering, she was becoming. And as the moonlight bathed them both in silver, the temple around them seemed to exhale, not because it had seen them before, but because it knew they would come again. Chapter 7. The Court That Burned. The fire in her veins hadn't cooled, even after she left the temple, even after Kael faded back into the shadows like he always did. The memory of his mouth on hers lived in her blood. It wasn't a kiss that softened or soothed. It had devoured. It had reawakened a part of her that didn't belong to this life. The ache remained, curling behind her ribs. Not just longing, but power, old and half-buried. She didn't sleep when she returned to the shop. She sat in silence on the old velvet chair behind the counter, legs pulled beneath her, fingertips brushing the edge of the ring still warm on her hand. Outside, the town dozed behind shuttered windows, unaware of the ancient bloodlines stirring beneath their cobbled streets. In her mind, the temple still echoed, its shadows, its stone. The way Kael had looked at her like she wasn't just his queen, but his ruin. And she had let him touch her like she wanted to be ruined. But it wasn't only desire that hummed beneath her skin. It was memory, rising too fast, too sharp, like a blade unsheathed before she knew her own strength. Visions had begun flickering at the edges of her sight, not dreams, not quite. Fragments. A name whispered through firelight, a voice calling her Nissa, a throne, obsidian and alive. The blood memory was returning. It wasn't gentle. By the second night, her reflection had started to shift, Not drastically, just slightly wrong. Her skin glowed faintly where moonlight touched it. Her eyes, violet gray and soft for most of her life, were darkening. Not with shadow, but with depth. Like a second self was waking inside her, layer by layer, breath by breath. And still, Kael didn't return. She felt him near, sometimes, as if he were watching from somewhere just beyond the veil. But he hadn't stepped into the shop, hadn't whispered her name, and that absence throbbed. The longer he stayed away, the more she felt the pressure building, like a storm gathering behind her eyes. The air around her thickened. Books fell from shelves when she passed too close. Glasses cracked in her hand without warning. The ring pulsed at night, vibrating against her skin until her dreams bled red. On the third night, Mara didn't come to work. Seraphine called. No answer. The fourth time, the line disconnected entirely. A cold weight settled in her spine. Mara didn't just not answer calls. She once texted back while actively falling off a ladder. When Seraphine reached her apartment, the door was ajar. Inside, nothing was broken, nothing stolen, but the place felt gutted, the air stale. A cup of tea still warm on the table. A single red thread stretched across the couch cushion, glimmering faintly under the light. Vampiric magic. Not Kael's. Something colder. She turned to run, but the hallway behind her was no longer empty. A man stood there. Not quite human, not quite whole. His smile was too wide, and his eyes held the flatness of something long dead. He smelled like rotted jasmine and dry earth. "You're early," he said, voice light, almost amused. "The court was hoping you'd be harder to find." Seraphine didn't answer. Her heartbeat slowed, not out of fear, but instinct. She wasn't prey anymore. Something ancient unfurled inside her, slow and deliberate. Where is she? His smile faltered. Still half asleep then. He stepped closer, slow and wrong, every movement too smooth. That's all right. The elders only need the blood, not the girl. She didn't remember moving. 1 second she stood at the threshold, and the next she was across the hall, her hand at his throat, heat rising from her skin like a wave breaking. He gasped, mouth opening in surprise, before her other hand lit with a pulse of violet light. The ring flared. She released it into him. He didn't scream. He shattered. A flash of light, a burst of ash, and then silence. Her breath came fast, not from panic, from power. Her veins pulsed like drum beats, her skin too hot for the air around her. Her hands trembled, not with weakness, but awakening. She stumbled outside into the cold night. The wind didn't bite anymore. It bent around her, tugged at her hair like it knew her name. He was waiting. Kael stepped from the alley with his coat half open, his eyes already searching for signs of injury. But when his gaze met hers, he stilled. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The storm inside her was still settling, but the look in his eyes turned feral, not with rage, not with concern, with awe. You've awakened it. I don't know what I did. You burned him, with memory, with blood. She swayed slightly. The power hadn't left. It was coiled under her skin, still shifting. They took her. They're coming for me now. They've always been coming, but they'll have to move through me first. His voice wasn't calm anymore. It was steel wrapped in velvet, cutting and soft. She reached for him, not because she needed comfort, but because her body had stopped pretending. And when her hand met his chest, the silence between them broke. Kael's mouth was on hers, before the first breath finished leaving her lungs. This kiss wasn't slow. It wasn't reverent. It was all sharp teeth and ancient ache, mouths parting like they had never been meant to be separate. Her fingers twisted into his coat. His hands were everywhere, her back, her waist, the curve of her jaw. She felt like lightning trapped inside flesh. And still, she wanted closer. He lifted her, pressed her against the wall of the alley, and she let him. Thighs tightening around his hips as his mouth trailed down her neck to the place where her pulse thundered. But he didn't bite. Instead, he whispered against her skin. Not yet. She gasped. Why not? His voice was rough. Because the next time I take your blood, it will seal you to me. She froze, not from fear, from the weight of what that meant. Not possession, not protection, bonding. Not to who she had been, but to who she was now. And still, some part of her didn't pull away. Some part of her wanted to be claimed, to be known. He set her down gently. His forehead rested against hers, breath uneven. The court knows you're waking. They'll come in force now. Then let them come. She wasn't Seraphine anymore. Not fully, not only. She was something else rising, and they would all burn if they tried to put her back in the ground. Chapter 8. Moon-blooded. The days that followed passed without shape, as if time had loosened its grip on her. Hours bled into each other like ink and water, and Seraphine moved through them in silence, the walls of the bookshop closing tighter with every breath. She no longer opened the store. She no longer pretended to be someone named Sarah Vale, the girl who lived quietly among the shelves and vanished with the sun. That girl had already begun to fade, her edges blurred by dreams she could no longer call dreams, by visions too vivid to explain away. Everything inside her had shifted since the alley, since the night Kael had pressed her against the stone and kissed her like he was afraid it would end her. She felt it now in her bones, in the slow, pulsing heat beneath her skin. Something awakening, something ancient and unyielding. When she looked in the mirror, the girl she saw was still her, but not quite. The shape of her was the same, but her eyes no longer held softness. They held storms. The ring on her finger had become a constant hum against her pulse, its presence both anchor and promise. She could feel Kael through it sometimes, not as a voice, not as words, but as warmth in the silence, a steady presence threaded into her senses. He kept his distance, as he always did, but she knew he was near. He didn't need to be seen to be felt. She could walk into a room and know where he had stood by the echo he left behind. The hunger inside her was changing too. It wasn't just the pull toward him, though that alone had become unbearable. It was something deeper. A tension in her blood. A heat that gathered in her limbs and spine and fingertips, until her whole body ached with it. When she closed her eyes, she dreamed of power. Not metaphorical, not poetic. Power as a living, breathing thing. She dreamed of thrones, of firelight, of her own voice, steady and cold. She dreamed of her hands wrapped in gold and blood, and always, always of Kael. When the pull grew too much to ignore, she found herself walking the path along the cliffs again, moonlight washing the stone in silver. The sea stretched below in restless waves, and wind tangled her hair around her face like ribbons of ink. He was already there, as she knew he would be, standing just beyond the old cairns with his back to her, looking out toward the black horizon, as if it whispered secrets only he could hear. She stopped a few paces behind him, the wind curling between them. His presence alone slowed her breath. He didn't turn, but she felt the shift in him the moment she arrived, the way his body seemed to gather itself, coiled and aware. "You've changed," he said after a long silence, voice low, threaded with something she couldn't quite name. "So have you," she murmured, stepping closer. "You're quieter now, like you're trying not to break something." His head tilted slightly, his voice rough. "I am." She reached for him without thinking, fingers brushing the edge of his coat before fisting the fabric gently, pulling herself closer until her body aligned with his. He still didn't move. She could feel the restraint in him, the rigid control that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with devotion. He held himself like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall would be exquisite and final. She rested her forehead against his back, the motion soft, almost childlike, but the ache in her chest was anything but innocent. "I feel it waking inside me," she said, her voice muffled against the fabric, "and I don't know what to do with it." He turned slowly, his movements deliberate, and she let her hands slide up his chest as he faced her. The tension in his body pulsed against hers, a quiet, burning thing. "You're moon-blooded," he said. "The last of your kind. You are made to carry this power, but it doesn't come gently." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "I don't want gentle." That broke something in him. She saw it happen, the way his mouth parted, the way his breath caught. He reached for her then, fingers curling around the nape of her neck, his thumb tracing along her jaw with reverent care. There was nothing tentative in his touch, only a slow, crushing need that had been held back for far too long. "You don't understand what you're asking of me," he said, voice raw, like it cost him something to speak at all. "I do." Her body leaned into his, and she felt the answering tension in him, the way his muscles strained under her touch. "I'm asking you to stop pretending we're something we're not. I know what this is. I've seen it in my dreams. I've felt it since the moment I saw you in that shop." He was shaking now, just slightly. His eyes burned into hers with something that looked too much like longing, too much like pain. "If I take you now," he said, "it binds us. Not just in this life. You'll carry me in your blood, in your voice. You'll never be free of me. Then don't hold back." Her hands slid up to his face, cupping his jaw. "Because I'm already not free of you. I feel you in every breath I take. He didn't answer. He kissed her, but it wasn't the kiss of a man claiming something. It was the kiss of a man remembering every version of her mouth, every moment he'd lost and found her again. His lips were soft but desperate, slow but unrelenting. His hands moved down her back, over her waist, pulling her flush against him as if he couldn't stand the space between their bodies. Her own hands buried in his hair, tugging gently, and he groaned into her mouth. Low, broken, like it had been torn from his throat. The sound made her shiver. She could feel the hunger in him now, not just for her skin or her power, but for her soul. He kissed her like he needed her to remember who she'd been, like every movement of his mouth against hers would anchor her to herself again. The wind screamed across the cliffs. The sea roared below, but there was only his body against hers, and the heat pooling between them. The way his hand gripped her hip, like he was at war with restraint. When he pulled away, it wasn't far. His forehead pressed to hers, his breath ragged. "You were made for me," he whispered, "and I was made to protect you." "You're not protecting me now," she said, her lips brushing his. "No," he murmured. "Now, I'm just holding on." They stood there in the dark, the moon painting their skin in silver, their hearts beating to the same impossible rhythm. She could feel his power folding around her like smoke, felt her own rising to meet it. They were no longer two separate forces. They were becoming, bound not by choice, but by blood, by fate, by centuries of fire and memory. And as the moon climbed higher into the sky, Seraphine understood something she hadn't before. The power inside her wasn't something to fear. It was a birthright. And Kael was not her shadow. He was her flame. Chapter 9. The Veil Tears. The wind shifted the next night. It wasn't just colder. It felt expectant. A breath held at the edge of something about to fall apart. Seraphine felt it first in the weight of the air, the way the silence had teeth now. Every sound had an echo. Every corner of the bookshop felt like it was listening. Kael didn't come at sunset. He didn't need to. She could feel him moving through the dark, not close, but circling. Protective. Hunting. Keeping a perimeter she hadn't asked for, but now relied on. Their bond had deepened in the silence between kisses, in the shared tension that never really broke, only changed shape. What had started as heat now held weight. She felt his thoughts brushing against hers in the quiet hours. Not words, just impressions. Rage, vigilance, want, the wordless pull of devotion that came through blood before it ever passed through mouth. She didn't know when she stopped seeing herself as separate from him. Maybe it was when she saw her reflection again, and noticed the way her eyes no longer looked quite human. Not cold, just too deep, too dark around the edges, as if something inside her had broken open and let night pour in. The veil between who she had been and who she now was had thinned. And when it finally tore, it wasn't subtle. It began with the floor beneath her trembling, only slightly at first, like the warning before a tremor. Books shifted on the shelves. The lights flickered once, then failed entirely. Outside, the sky fractured, The moon turned the color of iron, and something cold seeped into the edges of the world, ancient and greedy. They came not with armies, but with silence. Figures dressed in black, eyes like glass, not alive, not dead. Members of the court, or what remained of it, elders with skin stretched tight over bones, robed things that moved without footsteps. They passed through shadows, like they belonged there. Seraphine stood behind the counter when the first of them appeared in the doorway, not entering, just watching. Her breath didn't quicken. Her hands didn't shake. She no longer needed to pretend she wasn't what she was. She felt Kael's presence before she heard the door. He stepped between her and the threshold, silent, his body taut as a bowstring, head slightly lowered, eyes glowing faintly gold. She saw him differently now, not just a protector, not a shadow or a memory. He was her echo, her twin flame, the weapon that had always been drawn for her hand. The world narrowed to the space between his spine and her heartbeat. They didn't speak. Neither did the court. But they moved forward. Kael didn't wait for them to cross the threshold. His body was blur and force and fury, meeting the mid-step with violence that was more art than motion. His hands tore. His power cracked the air, but for every elder that fell, another took its place. And Seraphine. She didn't stay behind him. Something inside her pulled free, not like a scream, but like a song she'd been too afraid to sing. Her blood surged to the surface, violet light rising in her veins, leaking through her fingertips as the first of the elders reached toward her. She didn't move away. She moved forward. The light inside her wasn't fire. It was memory, raw and overwhelming. It struck through her like lightning loosed from the earth, not the sky. She raised her hand, and the elder reaching for her staggered back without being touched, flesh already blistering. Kael saw it. She felt the tremble in him, the flare of want tangled with awe. She stepped beside him, their shoulders brushing, not hiding, not shielding, equal. They moved together, silent, swift, in sync. He took one down with a blade forged from shadow. She crushed another with nothing but her outstretched hand, and a wordless pulse of power that left the air humming. It wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. And when the last of them lay broken across the stone floor, the room cracked open with silence again. Only then did she feel her knees threaten to buckle, the power she'd released still vibrating under her skin. Kael caught her before she could fall. His hands on her waist, steady, grounding. His breath hitched against her cheek. She looked up at him, eyes still lit from within, and what she saw on his face was not fear. It was hunger, pure and simple. He didn't kiss her right away. He held her, forehead to forehead, the air around them heavy with heat and blood and the weight of everything they'd just become. "You burned through them," he said, voice rough with something he couldn't name. "You remembered everything." She nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't choose to. It chose me." His mouth brushed the edge of her jaw, his breath ragged against her skin. "You've always been fire. You just forgot how to burn." He kissed her then, not like the first time, not with caution, This kiss had no leash, no hesitation. It was raw, desperate, full of the knowledge that there would be no turning back. His lips crushed hers, their mouths opening in the same breath, tongues meeting like memory. Her hands slid beneath his coat, palms flat against his spine, feeling the shudder that ran through him when she pressed closer. There was no space between them anymore. No fear, only heat, only claim. She felt it building again, the power, the bond, the thing that lived beneath her skin, reaching for his. The kiss broke, but only for air. Their foreheads stayed pressed, their hearts pounding against each other like fists against locked doors. "You're mine," he whispered, not as a promise, as fact. Her reply was the slow curl of a smile against his mouth, the kind that remembered 1,000 nights in his arms. "And you," she murmured, her voice dark with certainty, "were always meant to burn with me." The veil between past and present had torn, and on the other side, nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 10. The Mate of Midnight. The sky above them was ink black, streaked with silver clouds, and a moon so full it looked close enough to touch. The wind had stilled. The streets were quiet. The last of the court had retreated into shadow, and the ancient weight pressing on Seraphine's chest had finally lifted. The world hadn't ended, though it felt as if something older had. They stood in the ruins of it, together. Kael hadn't spoken since the last of the elders had turned to dust beneath their joined power. He hadn't needed to. His silence wasn't distant. It was reverent. He watched her like a man standing before something holy. His eyes held that same gold that had glimmered in her dreams for so long, but now it no longer felt unreachable. That glow belonged to her, as she belonged to him. Her body still thrummed with what she'd become. Power shifted beneath her skin like a tide that had finally turned, no longer violent but steady, claimed. It no longer frightened her. It was a part of her now, folded into her breath, her blood, her bones. She felt it in the way her hands no longer trembled, in the way her voice no longer broke when she said her own name aloud. Kael stepped toward her, each footfall slow and deliberate, like he feared the ground might vanish if he moved too quickly. His coat fell open, revealing the way his chest rose with each breath, uneven despite centuries of control. She saw something in his eyes that stopped her heart for just a moment. Not heat, not hunger, surrender. He stood before her without armor now. No silence, no guarded glances. Just Kael. She didn't wait for him to speak. She reached up and touched the side of his face, her fingers trailing the faint scar that cut across his jaw. One she remembered now, given to him by her own hand in a past life, in a moment of fear, not rage. He had worn it like a vow, a reminder. His eyes fluttered shut at her touch, his body leaning into her hand like the contact was something sacred. When she spoke, her voice was low, but it didn't waver. "There's no throne," she said. "No crown, no court, just this, just us." His hand came up, covering hers, holding it against his cheek, as though letting go would undo him. "I never wanted a throne," he said softly. "I only wanted to find you again." She stepped closer. Her other hand slid around the back of his neck, fingers threading into his hair. His body responded immediately, his breath catching, his hands moving to her waist, with a gentleness that didn't match the tension in his jaw. Their mouths met without ceremony. It wasn't the hunger from before, not the reckless pull that had left them both breathless on the cliffs. This kiss was slower, deeper, stretched like velvet across time. It tasted of old promises and something that had finally settled after centuries of drifting. His hands slid along her sides, over the curve of her back, steady and possessive. She arched into his touch, her body melting into his as their kiss deepened. Every inch of her skin that met his sent sparks through her limbs, not chaotic now, but tethered, grounded. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her through the broken doorway of what had once been her shop and now felt like a sanctuary reborn. Moonlight filtered through the shattered windows, casting soft, rippling shadows across the floor. He laid her down against the old velvet couch, not rushing, not demanding. His hands explored with reverence, not conquest. She welcomed the press of him, the weight of his body draped over hers like a shield. Their breaths mingled, their hearts aligning in a rhythm older than either of them could name. When she looked up into his eyes, she saw something deeper than want. She saw devotion, a kind not taught or forced, but built slowly, painfully, across lifetimes. He kissed her again, slower still, and her fingers slid beneath his shirt, tracing the lines of a body shaped by war, but softened only by her. The heat that rose between them was steady and consuming, not sharp, but endless. There was no desperation anymore, no fear of running out of time. Every touch felt like a vow made in silence, skin to skin, heart to heart. They stayed like that as the night stretched long, and the wind hummed softly outside. Wrapped in each other. No words spoken, no need for them. His breath slowed against her shoulder. Her hand curled over his. Their bodies tangled, not in frenzy, but in belonging. She didn't need to be bitten to feel claimed. He didn't need to mark her to know she was his. The bond had already sealed, not through blood, through choice. Through every moment she had stared into his eyes and remembered. Through every time she had looked at him and said with silence, "I am still yours," and he had answered the same way, "I never stopped being yours." As dawn crept closer, a pale blush on the horizon, Seraphine lay in the cradle of Kael's arms, their bodies warm beneath a worn blanket, their legs tangled together, like roots refusing to separate. There would be more to face, remnants of the court, the future of a race thought extinct, the question of what they might rebuild from the ashes of all they had destroyed. But for now, there was only this. A girl once hunted, a general once cursed, and the love that had outlived every death they'd ever known. They hadn't just survived. They had found each other in the dark, again, and this time she would not let him go.